sexy on Secular Sexuality.
Hello and welcome to Secular Sexuality, the ACA show that likes to end every week by encouraging people to give themselves a big ol' orgasm. So let me be very clear when I say J.K. Rowling can go fuck herself. With me tonight is two of the Free Thought Library's sexiest librarians, Bianca and Serafina Smith. Serafina will be with us right after the interview. So V, thanks for setting all this up for me.
Of course. This is a lot of fun. You're doing great, Christy. You're doing great.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. It's definitely a unique challenge to kind of come in and set up this interview that I was able to record with Trystan Reese last week. Trystan,
I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, I'm a little nervous. I got to tell you, he is a terribly impressive and intimidating figure who really has his finger on the pulse on every question I could possibly throw at him, and had a lot of really beautiful insights. So I want to thank the audience for joining us tonight and for watching this interview that we have all set up. We're going to be coming back afterwards here in just about 30 minutes to talk a little bit about that interview, to maybe prepare for our Discord town hall we're going to be doing right after the episode. So if you're watching this episode live, please feel free to join us in Discord during the show, and make sure to tune in afterwards when we're going to have a number of wonderful ACA hosts and Secular Sexuality guests come and join us to kind of continue to react to the interview and discuss all these kinds of things. V, there's just a lot to the world right now, and I think that goes doubly for the queer community in general, but particularly trans folks, as we're watching stuff pour out of the Supreme Court and out of the White.
Oh my gosh, yeah, this has been a week of conflicting emotions. And I'm counting them as a win because I need a win right now. But I'm excited about it. I think that for better or worse, we finally have a more inclusive definition of sex according to the Constitution, which is great. Something we've been fighting for a long time. And it was a trans woman who actually brought this case and put this in front of the Supreme Court. Yeah, there's that. They banned ICE from being able to co-opt local law enforcement this week. They also saved DACA. So as far as I'm concerned, this week was pretty good.
Yeah, well, and it's kind of needed, right? Like, this is a good time. We're halfway through Pride already, and it's nice to get a little bit of good news into the mix of things.
Right. Yeah. You know, they always need to give the heroes that moment of hope before they crush everything again. So I'm just enjoying this part of the plot.
Yeah. Just a writer who's been burned before. You know, I get it. Like, I read all of the Game of Thrones books. I feel that impending sense of doom and danger. Hopefully there is more, though, that we can be doing. And that's why I was so excited to be able to sit down with Trystan Reese, who made headlines a couple of years ago by choosing to speak publicly about his pregnancy as a trans man. From there, Trystan does a bunch of consulting and a number of different advocacy jobs. And so I'm really excited to watch this interview with y'all, and then we'll come back afterwards to touch base and kind of react to it. And then we're going to keep that conversation going. So again, if you're able to watch this live and not listening to this on a podcast weeks later, we hope that you're able to join us. That's just going to be tiny.cc/ACA Discord. And with that, I think, are you ready to go ahead and jump into that interview video?
Yes, I do want to make sure that everybody knows that after the interview and before the Discord, we are going to be answering any calls that we get. So if you have something that you called in with prior to hearing the intro, or if you have something that you want to talk about based on the interview itself, we will be taking a couple calls between the interview and the town hall on Discord. So feel free to call us at 512-991-9242. And if you call in, it's a couple minutes long, just hang tight, we'll get to you.
Yeah, and I suppose we should remind folks that they can hear the show as they're waiting on hold. Is that still the case in our new modern COVID-19 response update?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. Well, excellent. I'll be excited to jump back in live and speak with you and Serafina. For now, let me give the booth just a moment, and we're going to go ahead and start that interview. You've described your own trans experience as having felt like a gay man trapped in a woman's body before receiving hormone treatment. When we talk about trans issues, I think there's this really persistent belief that being trans means existing somewhere on that journey between like the body you were born with and the right body. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience and, why you chose to forego any additional gender confirmation?
Yeah. I mean, that's really a joke. It's a joke because when I was in high school, that was what they used to say about me is like, oh, that's just Trystan. He's a gay man trapped in a woman's body. And so I use that as, sort of like a tongue-in-cheek reference to that is a very rough way and a very non-subtle or unnuanced way of thinking about trans people. And so, yeah, that's just the joke is that's what they used to say about me in high school. And then it turned out that it wasn't a joke at all. It was real. I was a gay man trapped in a woman's body. I don't really see it that way. My body is not a woman's body. That's just me sort of making fun of myself and making fun of some of the dominant narratives around transness. But to get to the second part of your question, thinking about the true intersections between, dysphoria, which is, for people who don't know, it's the sense of psychological discomfort that a trans person might experience when they think about their body and its relation to their gender or the way the world perceives their body and its relation to their gender. I would say, there's definitely a spectrum of dysphoria. Some people are profoundly uncomfortable with their bodies or profoundly want to make profound changes to their bodies so that they're more in alignment with their gender identity. And then some people don't have any dysphoria at all. And it doesn't make anyone any more or less trans. It just is just people are on a spectrum and I'm somewhere in the middle. And so, I definitely did want to take testosterone so that, the world could see me that in a way that was more in alignment with how I saw myself. And that was for me the extent that I needed to go to be able to continue to stay alive in this body and to be happy and comfortable. I never really wanted to make any additional changes. Although since I've had my baby, I have had top surgery. My body changed quite a bit throughout pregnancy. And so that was something that I really needed to do to live hopefully the second half of my life. Almost 40 puts me at 80. Yeah. Okay.
You don't need to look at the math too closely on that.
No, but I really did kind of think like, okay, I did my thing. I had a baby. It made some changes. If I'm halfway through this life, what would make me feel even better? And so yeah.
Well, and I think that's so important to recognize that, gender is on a spectrum, of course, but we so often, without meaning to, I think, kind of divide it into maybe men and women, perhaps with like an asterisk or maybe a second set of categories for trans men and trans women, instead of recognizing that people just are and that they occasionally want to be something different as well. I mean, there's a fluidity to it.
I think, I often tell the story of my dad. He's a doctor. He's like a 78-year-old white, straight Canadian man. And like, he has never been into sports. I think maybe he pretends to be into hockey a little bit, but that's just like not his thing. He like is an intellectual. And no one has ever said to him, oh, you don't get to be a man because you're not into hockey. And yet we have a double standard around transgender men that it's like, we're only allowed to be the narrowest version. And even, looking at just, I know nothing about you. You have long hair and a ponytail. You're wearing nail polish. And I bet it's pretty infrequent that someone is like, how dare you? The nail polish thing, maybe there's some judgment and certainly longer hair in the past, there's been there, but there's a much wider spectrum of what non-trans or cisgender people are allowed to express. My mom has short hair. She's always had short hair. She doesn't wear makeup. No one's like, you're not a woman. But if a transgender woman tries to have short hair and not wear makeup, well, all of a sudden she's like somehow subverting the gender binary and is going to take all of us down with her. And so, yeah there's a fluidity there.
There's a fluidity, and that kind of thinking can create so much toxicity. You know, a few weeks ago on the show, we were talking about the influence of toxic masculinity on the trans community, and how there's this sense that you have to be a certain type of man in order to be allowed to be a trans man and fit into some sort of example or stereotype, even if it's not serving you.
Yeah, especially if it's not serving you, you still feel caught in it and trapped in it. And that's part of why I wanted to tell my story. You know, it was for cisgender men, it was for non-transgender men to see a different way of being a man, that maybe they can't have a baby, but that doesn't mean that they can't embrace the life creating, nurturing parts of themselves. It was for transgender men so they could see, even if you don't want to have a baby, this is an option to you too. It's just, it doesn't have to be that narrow. And if someone told you that you have to conform to something that's not authentic for you in order to be a man, they were lying. And it's a hard reality, I think, for people to face, which is why I faced a lot of backlash. But I also felt like it was really critical in terms of dismantling this idea of toxic masculinity, this idea that there's only one way to do masculinity. And if you don't do it that way, then you're, I don't know, screwed.
Well, tell us a little bit about the impact of pregnancy on your gender care, on your dysphoria. I mean, you mentioned wanting to have top surgery after the fact. Walk us through that journey a little bit, if you would.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, I wouldn't say that I had very high levels of dysphoria going into pregnancy. I was somewhere in the middle, so there was some parts of my body I'm quite comfortable with, some parts of my body I'm not. And it's been a long journey of being as comfortable as I am with my body. And so going into pregnancy, I expected as my body changed, maybe my relationship with it would change too. Maybe I would feel more dysphoria around it. And the truth is I didn't, I've been in the trans movement long enough that I know that for 21 years, transgender men have been having babies, maybe longer, but 21 is the oldest that I know of. This is not new to us. It may be new to other people, but in the community, it's not new or even rare. And so I have a lot of examples of men in my life who have given birth. And so the connection between pregnancy and femininity, it's a little broken for me. I know that pregnancy is something that mostly women do, but occasionally a super dope dude is allowed to do it as well. And so that's sort of how it is in my mind. And so as I went through the experience, in terms of my gender affirming care, I stopped testosterone in order to regain an ovulatory cycle. Testosterone is a dose-dependent ovulation suppressant, which is fancy doctor language for if you take it appropriately, it should stop ovulation. Obviously that if is doing a lot of work in that sentence, but I had stopped taking testosterone so that I could become fertile again. And so that's really the only adjustment that had to be made in terms of my care. And every study that has come out over the last, every study on trans fertility and trans pregnancy shows that a trans pregnancy is medically the exact same as a cisgender pregnancy. There may be some like labor choices and some postpartum choices that transgender men make that are different than cisgender women on average, but medically it's the same. A uterus is a uterus is a uterus. Eggs are eggs are eggs. Fetuses are fetuses are fetuses. It's all the same. The only difference is, you may have to, you should stop taking testosterone if you want to get pregnant. And then, postpartum, I went back on testosterone when I feel like my body had done its healing. Estrogen plays a pretty vital role in healing from pregnancy and delivery. But, once that was done, I didn't plan to nurse my child. And there are some issues with testosterone and the production of human milk. That wasn't an issue for me. We fed my baby alternatively. And so yeah. And what we see in the data is, about a third of transgender men who have babies or non-binary people who have babies, about a third find that their dysphoria does get worse. So that's not uncommon. So it's a legit question for people to ask. And my experience is not universal. None of my experiences are universal. No one person's experiences are universal. But about a third find that their dysphoria does get worse and they have a really, really hard time psychologically through pregnancy. About a third are like me. They're just like no better, no worse, kind of just like nerding out on the science of a baby being created inside of another body. That's cool and weird. And about a third actually find that their dysphoria gets better or even goes away, because there's a reclamation that can happen of maybe they felt conflicted about having this type of a body, but now it's being used to do something really cool. And so they actually find that they're able to feel empowered about the body that they have and see the gift that like most dudes don't get to do something this cool. And we get to, like, that's pretty awesome.
For sure. And I really appreciate you highlighting that while, CNN and everybody else is kind of freaking out on a global scale, that inside the community, this is not as shocking, not as strange by any means. And so I guess I want to kind of explore that a little bit further and ask you a little bit about your experience with a miscarriage and how that was impacted by your gender, or how, I guess, just the opportunities and the care that was available.
Yeah, I mean, 1 in 3, 1 in 4 known pregnancies is not viable. And so mine happened to fall into that category the first time I got pregnant. So it's not uncommon. It's actually pretty common. And I would say the only way that my trans identity impacted the care I received was actually in the positive sense. The particular, care clinic that I was receiving support around for my pregnancy was really exquisite in the way that they treated my pregnancy loss. I never at any time felt that they believed or wanted me to believe that I had done something wrong that had caused this to happen. At every single point they said, yeah, this happens all the time. And 99% of the time, we don't know why. Just like bodies are complicated and the creation of new life is imprecise and natural, and nature's messy and doesn't give a crap about us. Not everything works out, And so I think it was one of the few times in my life where I was receiving the kind of medical care that didn't feel tainted by transphobia in any way at any point. So I thought that they were really, really lovely. And it was an exception that proved the rule, because it stood out in such stark contrast to other medical experiences I've had through my life. And more globally, trans people, 1 in 4 trans people has been denied access to necessary medical care. Now, I don't know if you've ever been to an ER or an urgent care or a pediatrician, but to be at that level of possible anxiety and medical need, and to have someone say, we don't treat people like you, well, that's a devastating and traumatic experience that 1 in 4 trans people have experienced. I've experienced. So to have a different and new relationship to medical providers, that was really, I think, one of the blessings that came out of what was a difficult experience for me. It wasn't spiritually difficult. I'm adamantly pro-choice, and I feel like I can share that because of the topic of the show. I didn't see it as losing a baby. I didn't believe it was a baby. In my mind, I was in my relationship, we called it a potential future baby. PFB. That was our shorthand. So it was super weird. I mean, not as a trans person, but as someone who's agnostic, as someone who does not believe that life starts at conception. It was super weird that whenever I told anyone, they were like, OMG, I'm so sorry for your loss.
Sure.
And I'm like, I appreciate that. And I appreciate your empathy. And I understand that in the birth world, women particularly have not been allowed to grieve when there has been loss and miscarriage.
That was really the nature of my question, is just the fact that our society is really not built to help 2 gay men grieve over a miscarriage. It's hardly built to even allow cis women to grieve a miscarriage.
That's right. And it's funny because I had such a powerful, positive experience with the nurses that I was working with. And then the only other super positive experience I actually had was with a pastor. We had gone out to coffee and she had asked me, I actually started going to her sort of nature-based services during my miscarriage because I wanted a place to put this experience. And I wasn't raised Christian. I didn't know where else to put it. But someone said, do you want to come to our nature-based, wildness focused service? And I was like, I don't know, sure. And so she took me to coffee and she's like, why did you come? You're not Christian. And I said, I needed a place to put this complicated experience I was having. I had a miscarriage. And she leaned in to me and she said, oh, tell me what that was like for you. And I was like, there it is. That's what I wanted this whole time. That's what I wanted this whole time, was not, oh, I'm so sorry for your loss, but that openness. What was that like for you? An invitation to bring the fullness of, it was gross physically. It was gross physically. Like that was the biggest experience because, bodies are messy and birth and pregnancy and miscarriage, all of it. Like it's a visceral experience, meaning like the literal guts, like the viscera of your body. And she really invited me to bring all of that fullness and nuance. And so it's funny that the support that I really received that was helpful was from nurses, and I've had a complicated relationship to medical establishment, and from a person of the cloth when I have a complicated relationship to religion. So yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, your advocacy work came to my attention because of a workshop that you had done for a group of doulas. And so I am very curious about what that whole experience with medical staff was, whether you felt that your gender was affirmed, whether you felt that people were knowledgeable. Not that, again, I recognize that this is a standard pregnancy. It's not overly complicated because of your gender identity, but people still tend to make it that way sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because there's really two different communities and like ways of thinking, or like two different ethoses. Ethi? I don't know. But there are two extremes that I'm used to working with and moving towards the middle. And so there's definitely like the formalized Western medical establishment and way of thinking about things. And it's extremely rigid. And I'm very, very lucky as a white person living in Portland, having had access to healing from my own medical trauma. I was able to navigate Kaiser, which is where I gave birth, from a place of empowerment. And it was not easy. Those systems are not built for us. They're not built for anyone outside of the norm. But I was able to both honor my spirit and not pick every fight, but then also pick some fights. Like the paperwork's not going to be inclusive. Like it's not going to have a space for me. Okay, I'm not going to pick that fight. But the ultrasound technician that calls me by the wrong pronoun, I'm going to pick that fight, And so I tried to figure out where can I find room to advocate for myself? And then how can I build systems out of that can teach future providers so that other trans people don't have to bear that burden. And so helping them get out of that black and white thinking of gender and assigned sex at birth and pregnancy, helping them relearn new ways of using language. That's one way that I approach the work that I do. And then the other approach is in the doula space. Doulas are not medical providers. They're emotional support people. And sometimes doulas are also midwives. Sometimes doulas are also nurses. But really their primary role is holding that emotional space for those big transitional times in a person's life, whether it be birth or death or abortion or whatever. That's what doulas do. And a lot of doulas really come at birth and pregnancy with this real obsession with their perception of what is natural. And so that's been the other end of the spectrum, is I've had to also now coach doulas out of a lot of the judgment and shame that they have. Like, there's a renewed obsession with breastfeeding. And really now there's a lot of, this is not science. This is not evidence-based care. It's another religion. It's another fiction or a myth that people have created, that there is one right way to do something. And I get it. It's in opposition to this other way of being, this medicalized way of being, but it's also not right. And I'm not saying that, the obsession with breastfeeding is transphobic, but what I'm seeing is the impact on trans people is extremely problematic and painful. And so I'm in that middle space where I try to pull doctors closer to trauma-informed care. And I pull people in the natural birth world closer to evidence-based practice and judgment-free support. So that, because that's not trauma-informed either. And so, so I do both. And I think I stand squarely in that middle space where I see both approaches, and I want to bring them together so that people can make informed, empowered decisions throughout all of their pregnancy and into postpartum, whether that's a home birth or a hospital birth, whether it's formula or donor milk or their own breast milk or their partner's induced lactation, whatever the nerdity is. I want them to do it from empowerment and not feel like they're being judged or shamed for those decisions.
Yeah, I mean, you've certainly mentioned a few concerns over access to medical care in general, pressure towards breastfeeding and some of these other things. But what are the other barriers to reproductive health in the trans community?
So many. I think I think about them in concentric circles because I'm a nerd. And so I think there's the internal barrier, specifically reproductive health, specifically fertility. If you've never thought of yourself as a parent, if you've never seen other trans people who are parents, if you didn't think that you could afford fertility assistance if you need it, you're not even going to have the vision to imagine it for yourself and then to expect or ask the world to show up for you. So there's the internal barriers of just not being able to see a potential future, a positive future for yourself, and to plan ahead, because there are some transition steps that are going to impact your future fertility. So there's the internal barriers. And then we get a little bit bigger, and then there's the community and social barriers. A lot of people, especially in communities of color, especially in rural communities, especially in religious households or upbringings, they have to deal with, if they want to get pregnant and have a baby, their whole community around them, their friends, their family, even other LGBTQ people might be like, whoa, like how can you expect us to see you as a man if you like also want to get pregnant? So they're dealing with those community pressures. And then we've got the systems, we've got the barriers to care. There's the lived experience as well as the fear of discrimination and transphobia in medical systems, which that's just data. Like that's just statistics. Transphobia is real and powerful and pervasive and toxic in many, 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 many medical spaces. And that is the same for holistic medicine. It's the same in, traditional or indigenous practices. It's true in traditional Chinese medicine, and it's true in Western allopathic medicine. Across the board, trans folks experience discrimination, bias, harassment, abuse. And then there's, the other barriers to care are insurance usually doesn't cover fertility stuff for any queer people, but especially for trans folks. The finances is a huge aspect. So then we get to that sort of like meta systems level. And then even beyond that, there's the legal stuff. How do you, what are you going to put on a birth certificate?
Right.
That level of complexity.
Well, and to that end, we're just a few weeks away from the 5th anniversary of Obergefell v. Hodges, and it makes me wonder how the extension of marriage equality made your experience easier as, these rights become more and more legally codified. If we're trending in the right direction, if you feel like these protections are starting to kick in.
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated. I worked in the gay marriage movement for many years. And then, I really was part of the wave to capitalize on the momentum of the gay marriage movement, to really transition it into being a trans-centered continued fight for liberation. And, not much changed in my family when that decision came down, because the state of Washington had legalized marriage. And so we were able to go across the border and get married legally there. We didn't plan to do it because who cares what the state has to say about our marriage or a relationship. But the HR director at the nonprofit I worked for at the time was like, well, I can't tell you what to do, but people in your situation take home a lot more money if they're married. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, okay, well, let's get married then. I want more money. And so it's completely bogus that the system is set up this way, but I'm too old to believe that the system can be completely overturned and something new can be created. I'm much more, try to think about how do we survive today while keeping our eye on the prize of transformation and liberation. So I know for me, not a whole lot changed because we'd already been married. But the ability to get married, we have 2 older kids who are adopted, and us being married went a long way to being able to show the courts that we were a committed, stable household. For immigration purposes, the Obergefell decision was huge. To have people who came from, queer people who came from unsupportive countries where they faced outright discrimination, possibly torture leading up to death, to be able to come here legally if they weren't able to make it through the asylum system, to be able to have a partner sponsor them, marriage equality did that. And that's huge in terms of just saving the lives of our community. So there are some ways in which it was really, really revolutionary and great. And then, there's also some ways where it is buying into the notion that, marriage, 2 people together legally committed is the only right way to form a family. And we know that there's lots of other really great ways to do it.
Yeah, what do you see as sort of the next hurdle or the next opportunity? I know that there are, many different types of pressures and different obstacles and barriers for trans folks, but I'm just curious if you feel like there's something that we might be reading about soon, anything that we can be putting our focus on.
I mean, we had a plan. We had like a, 10, 15-year plan for trans liberation under Obama. And not to say that the Obama administration was perfect. It wasn't. And especially around immigration. I was working at immigration equality under Obama. And, the deportations were, were egregious and deadly for our community. But really everything has been sort of thrown up in the air under this administration. It's hard to say what is our number one priority because that, we're rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. Like that's what it feels like right now is we're just doing our best. And under coronavirus where, people of color, trans people of color have been wildly disproportionately impacted because of all the other, all the other things I already talked about. If you're not going to see a doctor regularly, I just found out yesterday that 80% of Black Americans have not been able to shelter in place. They have not been able to quarantine because many of them work in jobs that used to be marginalized and now for some reason we're deeming essential. In-home care workers, nurses, janitorial staff, food service, like those are positions that are largely filled by people of color in our country. And when you're not able to shelter in place, you're more at risk for coronavirus. 1 in 2 LGBTQ plus Black people, whether they're gay men, bisexual men, or transgender women who are African American, 1 in 2 is likely to contract HIV over the course of their life. 50%. In certain age groups, like 40 to 50, the rates even go up from there. And that is also a community that is statistically way less likely to engage in medically risky behaviors. They're having fewer sex partners. They're more likely to be having safe sex, and yet they're still at greater risk of contracting HIV. And so it's whack-a-mole. You start to think about issues of health in the trans community. Like that's just, it's so critical. And then you like sort of think about that for a while. And then you're like, oh my God, incarceration. Like, trans folks are way more likely to be held in solitary confinement, which by the way, global human rights groups believe is torture, right? So then you're like, oh my God, we have to think about incarceration and like a holistic approach to incarceration, not just improving conditions today, but how do we stop the pipelines into incarceration? Oh, but then that's about foster care. 3 out of 4 people in prison at some point were foster kids. Holy crap. So we got to think about that. There's no one thing. It's all about the like woo-woo idea that I have, which is just like care about trans people. Mm-hmm. And then however you are called to do the work, whatever your gifts are, find where what you're great at lines up with what the trans movement needs and do that. If you can tell stories, tell stories. If you can make art, make art. If you can march. If you can develop policy, develop policy. If you can hire trans people, hire trans people. If you can make sure your kids are aware, are not transphobic, then do that. Like wherever you're called to do the work, like we need all hands on deck here.
Do wherever you can do it.
Exactly. Similar to, I'm doing a lot of one-on-one anti-racism coaching right now with white folks because I have now I have over a decade's experience doing anti-racism facilitation, curriculum design, etc. Now I'm doing one-on-one coaching, and that's what I tell the people that I coach. It's just like, look, people may yell at you on the internet that you're doing the wrong thing or that you're not doing the right thing or what you're doing is stupid or not enough or whatever. But like, you have to follow your own compass. You know what your gifts are. And when you put yourself in harm's way, you're going to be dysregulated. You're not going to be able to do good work. So don't do those things. If you have social anxiety, don't go to a damn march. It's going to freak you out. You're going to be down for the count for 2 weeks. You could have spent that time talking to your racist uncle, if that's your gift, connecting with people and persuading people. You could have spent time making poetry that those marchers were going to read late at night on Instagram that was going to give them the fortitude to get up the next day and go back out on the streets. You could have been showing up for your teenager and talking with them about race and racism and helping support them to mandate anti-racism training at their school for all their teachers. you know, there are so many racism, transphobia shows up everywhere. So we need people working everywhere to dismantle it. And it can feel hard because you want to do the right thing, but I really encourage people to find that intersection between the right thing and what their gifts are and what they love to do and what their passion is, and then live there, and don't let other people's trauma convince you that what you're doing is not the right thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, as folks watching this decide to go out and find their right thing, I mean, is there any one thing that you feel like people just don't know and need to?
I mean, there really isn't. This happens. I do like an Instagram live and a doctor's like, oh, how can I be trans inclusive in my practice? And I'm like, oh, do you have 3 hours? Because that's how long my training for doctors literally is. Yeah, I mean, I guess the one thing is, you know, when it comes to trans folks, I just really, really encourage people to consume media that is made by and for trans people. You know, I define allyship as the ability to see the world through multiple lenses. You can't do that unless you understand trans people, unless you understand trans culture. So go on social media, you know, follow the trans hashtags, find those influencers, which in the trans world, those are the storytellers, those are the artists, those are the photographers, those are the speakers, those are the writers. You know, follow them, read their stories, believe them. You know, it's the same as when you're following people of color. When someone says this horrible thing happened to me, a part of your dominant brain, a part of the bias in you is going to try to find I call it a PLE, a perfectly logical explanation for why this thing happened to this person of color, this trans person, and just, you know, grapple with that little voice that's saying, well, maybe you didn't get that job for some other reason. And well, maybe they were talking to the person behind you. Well, maybe no one likes to sit next to anyone on a bus. Okay, get rid of that and just really hear people's stories. Elevate their voices. The way that the algorithms work is like, comment, share, save. You know, that's a free way that you can like plug someone into an even bigger mic, an even bigger amplifier, so that more people see and hear their voices. So I guess that's the place I would say to start.
Well, glad to hear it. I really appreciate you finding some time for us today and sharing all of this with us.
Yeah, happy to help.
Whew. Well, welcome back, Serafina. Thank you so much for joining us. I can't help but feel like I've been talking a lot, so please, y'all jump in.
That was fascinating. I loved that. Thank you for facilitating that interview, Christy.
Yeah, I mean, it really felt like just sort of tossing it out there, winding him up and letting him take it from there, which was a great experience because he clearly has been working to communicate these ideas. But yeah, there was a lot of, I think, really challenging information for me, and even as I'm trying to just keep up. And I couldn't help but notice as we were like watching through that conversation that was on a Wednesday, and then on a Friday, the Supreme Court came and delivered to us a rather dramatic piece of news that I would have loved to have gotten to be able to respond to with him. How do y'all sort of react to the news that's coming out of the Supreme Court and some of these other pieces?
Sera, you're in from computer purgatory.
Yeah. Do we have you working?
I think so. I've got something of a delay, but
Yay.
we'll see.
Cool.
Okay.
Yeah. So regarding this Supreme Court decision, I am grasping at it desperately as a win because I just feel like one is so desperately needed right now.
Sure.
So I'll take it. Is my response? Yes. Let's jump on this and do our best to mitigate any twisting of it in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, fair enough. If y'all like, I see we've got a number of calls that came in while we were watching the video, so we can go ahead and jump in with Johnathan in Alabama. Johnathan, we appreciate you hanging on the line. What can we do for you tonight?
Absolutely. I think I may have called when you were on before. You'll forgive me if I don't remember anybody's names, but few months ago, maybe even a month ago. My recollection of time is complete shit. I called to ask kind of how to figure out where I'm at in regards to sexuality, because quite frankly, I grew up in a very repressive household. I have no clue what I am in a lot of respects. I think I mentioned last time I considered I might be ace, but I'm just genuinely not sure how much of that is genuinely how I feel and how much of that is being prevented from feeling things.
Sure. Yeah, and that's a really important step. Can you tell us a little bit about that numbness, or where you are in your journey through all this?
Well, my father was a very abusive man in a lot of respects, mentally especially. I didn't get a proper sex talk when he noticed that I was starting to be interested in, well, anything, quite frankly. He took me to the graveyard by our house and showed me everybody in his graduating class who died of an STD. And that was my sex talk.
Wow. Yeah. All right.
Yeah. And
I can certainly appreciate that could set up some kind of block.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I got into a pretty intense relationship as a teenager. Dated a girl for 3 years, and she died before we graduated high school. And that messed me up pretty bad, if I'm being perfectly honest.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I'm just kind of trying to figure out where I'm at. It's a little difficult right now trying to figure things out when I can't actually date anyone right now.
Right.
It's funny. I started a dating profile, and it's gotten more attention since COVID lockdown started than anything else.
Yeah.
We're all
I'm
thirsty
sure it's
right
a case
now.
of them being stuck at home browsing through apps too.
Yep.
Well, so it sounds like you're taking some steps to, I guess, feel more comfortable and to walk up towards these things. Tell me just about your journey. I mean, where are you right now? You said that you are like working towards feeling a little bit more connected and trying to understand yourself. What is it that you're trying? What's going on at the moment?
Well, I'm talking to people, and
good start.
I'm finding no matter how it comes up, I don't like talking about sex. Like,
sure.
And even if I can get in a situation where there's no guilt on my end or anything like that, I've gotten past that. There's no enjoyment of the discussion of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, like, I've done it, and it just feels like a chore when I'm doing it. Like, honey, could you take out the trash real quick? And that's probably not the greatest comparison to make. Is there a,
no, I get
is there a chore that doesn't involve stuff that's dirty? I mean, honey, could you pay taxes? Yeah.
Ultimately, though, I think it's fair to say that you're not driven to and not enjoying these things. And I guess I wonder if that feels like a problem to you.
Well, I like the romantic aspects of it. I like dinners. I like doing things for people, and I like it being special. And I like going out to eat, and I like paying for the meal. It doesn't matter if it's a guy or girl. I like being the one to pay for the meal. I like it being something nice I got to do for them. And I like seeing movies, and there's a romantic aspect to it that. Mm-hmm. Feels a little weird in a lot of respects, because I'm like, it's not like I want this traditional marriage or anything like that. I think I could go my entire life without that, but
yeah, it's weird. We've set up this unspoken cultural expectation that right. X leads to Y leads to Z. So if you do X, then that means that you're also signing on for Y and Z, but you aren't necessarily. And so I understand how a lot of the time it can be confusing and often probably anxiety inducing to the point where maybe it's not as fun as it could be if you're worried that if I pay for dinner, that sends a signal that I want to have sex later and I don't, or there is that unspoken kind of cultural expectation there. So I definitely feel you on that.
Oh goodness, don't even get me started on kids. Just no way.
Right there with you on that.
Oh, and there's this expectation. Like, I hit 30 here recently, and people have finally stopped telling me eventually you're going to want kids. Mm-hmm. That's nice. Which,
oh, nice. Okay, cool. So when I'm 30, that'll stop.
Highly male presenting. Because I don't think if I were a woman or anybody who presented female, I would ever get away from that until I had kids. And that seems unfair.
Yeah.
One, and let me,
I suppose,
just take a moment to clarify that, you're certainly allowed to be asexual while still having romantic interest. I know we tend to sort of bundle these things, but I hope that identity option has been sort of presented to you. And, you don't have to use the adjectives that are available, but I guess I'm curious where you feel you are now and if there's some place that you're looking to go.
As far as the split attraction model concerns, I guess I consider myself bisexual aromantic. I mean, the other way around.
Yeah.
Asexual biromantic. I can't even get my own labels right.
None of us do. None of us do.
No. And that's the thing. Maybe 10 years from now, I'll feel differently about it. Maybe I'll have better language to describe how I am, but I'm trying to be comfortable with, I don't know, and then working from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's one of the hardest things, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
Oh, I said that's one of the hardest things is just the being comfortable with not knowing. It's such a barrier to learning things. Because you sort of jump into it, and maybe that's not the best way.
No, I got into an argument with somebody, and I told them I can't reason with you. I can't correct you because you can't be wrong, because you can't not know, and I don't want to do that to myself.
Yeah, I think it's also worth pointing out that I know a lot of people have this conception that you have to be. Like there's this weird push to, you can only be a thing if you've gotten there completely healthily and without any outside influence and all of this. But regardless of how you get to where you are, you're there. So just because there might be some religious trauma that you still have to unpack, and maybe later on you might change your approach or what you want or desire, right now you seem to be asexual, and that's fine, and it doesn't matter where that springs from. It's just as real as if you were born asexual and nothing else influenced you at all, right? There's no purity test for this.
I guess
so
it's a question of finding a way to be healthy in the moment.
Right. And I would definitely encourage I encourage therapy for everybody. But I would definitely encourage if you think that this is something you'd like to work on, going to talk to somebody about that, with the goal of figuring out, is this something I want?
I need to find a different therapist for this, I think. My other therapist has been really good for me in getting over a lot of the religious trauma. But I feel like I'm reaching the end of his expertise with some of this. Older gentleman.
Sure.
He's
that's an important thing to check in on. Yeah. What we understand from the research is that your therapist's theoretical orientation matters. Their education matters. All of these different things are important, but really, really, they pale in comparison to the importance of that relationship. So even if this is a therapist who's really well equipped to talk to you about issues of sexuality, if you don't feel like you can share them comfortably, that's a problem in and of itself. I mean, that's the whole thing. So yeah, I would encourage you to prod at that a little bit and sort of confirm whether or not these anxieties about talking about these issues is based in anything. But if his responses leave you feeling cold or clammy or just uncomfortable, that's important information to hold on to.
Yeah, I tried to open up about it one time to one therapist, and they basically asked me if I was a pedophile, and that...
Ugh.
Like,
that'll be a barrier. That'll rupture the relationship just a bit.
Yeah,
That's
honestly, I stopped going to therapy and I went off my meds, and yeah, there were a lot of mistakes made that month.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm in a much better place now, though.
No,
That's
I'm
good.
certainly glad to hear it. I appreciate you kind of sharing your experience with us and really just give us an opportunity to, like you pointed out, split those two things and recognize that sexuality is wonderful, romance is wonderful. You can want both or either or neither, and they don't necessarily need to come bundled.
Yeah, I think so long as I'm honest with people about what I want, and whether or not I know what I want, it's okay.
Yeah.
I just I want to make sure I'm exploring it in a healthy way, and that like in recent years I've been learning to stand up for myself in a lot of things.
Okay.
But in recent months I've been learning to stand up for myself without stepping on anybody else.
Mm.
And
That's the journey.
I feel like taking care to make sure that I'm exploring myself without hurting other people is important.
Yeah. I love that. I think that that's the best any of us can do. And really expressing what you're looking for in terms of a relationship and your boundaries and what you expect to be able to share and keep private is something that we all deal with, right? That is the hallmark of a healthy beginning of a relationship, communicating your wants and needs and boundaries, regardless of your sexuality or your gender identity. So this is your particular journey. And as you continue to explore that, definitely give us a call back and let us know how things are going.
Absolutely. I'll check. I'm sure I'll check in every now and then. Yeah.
Thanks so much for calling,
We
Johnathan.
certainly appreciate it.
All
You
right.
have a great night.
I'm glad I did call. The tarot reading was correct.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like I should have mentioned the episode that we did with Marie Delafont, where we talked about designer relationships and just this idea that the default model, the like factory setting that we all come out looking for these conventional relationships where you're supposed to be coworkers and then acquaintances and then friends and then you date and you fall in love and you have sex and you move in together, and like there's supposed to be some sort of order to these things when
You're supposed to be a high-powered magazine editor in New York City living in a loft way too expensive for what you're making.
Right.
And
Dating
he
an
definitely
architect.
has to be an artist who's struggling doing sidewalk chalk, and you guys have there's a very set way to do these things, you guys.
Right. Yeah. No, clearly.
Yeah, I feel
Just
like
a good reminder to all of us to be ourselves.
I feel like the external narrative is a little more pressing on us than our own internal narrative when we are learning who we are, and that sort of gets in the way a lot.
Yeah, well, especially when we don't even have sort of the language to hold on to who we are or to be able to describe it, it makes us a little bit more vulnerable to being pushed back and forth. And so that's, in a nutshell, I think why we do this show, because if you don't know the word aromantic or the word asexual, or that there's the opportunity to divorce those two ideas, then you might be pushed around a little bit more than you would equipped with that information.
Mm-hmm.
So with that in
tool.
mind, yeah, right. Let's check in with Godless in New York City. Godless, what can we do for you tonight?
Good name.
Hello?
Howdy,
Hello.
what's on your mind?
Hello?
Hi, can you hear us?
Yes. I'm calling about the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment.
Mm-hmm.
And it is just a thought that when it passed,
the language no discrimination based on sex was added by a congressman who was also a white supremacist, because he did not want black men to have more rights than white women.
Mm-hmm.
So he insisted on adding sex. And today, when we read the Gorsuch decision, it was used completely in the opposite way to give trans people rights. So
yeah, and has
Take
been
that.
before. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So it's just a thought that sometimes even when laws pass through hypocrisy and bad information, it could be useful down the line. It did
absolutely.
happen.
And we're seeing that right now. You know, I hate to be cavalier about it, but to see a lot of the positive change that has come in the past couple of weeks and months because of the, televised and recorded violence and the death of George Floyd in particular, but a number of other incidences that are now hopefully leading to some positive change.
Yeah. It's impressive what the people can still do. The FBI of the Louisiana FBI, I believe, are looking into the death of Breonna Taylor now because enough public interest has been raised over the issue. Meanwhile, we're getting reports that other lynchings that have happened are not getting attention by the police because of a lack of public interest. So the interest of the public, who we decide to platform, how we decide to talk about these things, and what we decide to demand, especially with the 14th Amendment revision in the Supreme Court. All of this is a direct result of us speaking out and being visible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just a quick note, I believe it is that Breonna Taylor was in Louisville, and that the FBI is now coordinating with the Kentucky AG.
Sounds good. Cool. This teaches you not to just read headlines and stuff.
I hope we do not lose this momentum before real changes happen. And this is why I brought up the ERA, because it is a real possibility. It was ratified by Virginia, the 38th required state, last January, and it has a real chance. Basically, to sum it up, the Equal Rights Amendment is a proposed amendment to the United States Constitution designed to guarantee equal legal rights to all American citizens, regardless of sex. It seeks to end the legal distinction between man and woman in matters of divorce, property, employment, and other matters. We can make this happen in 2020.
Yeah, is there anywhere that you can point the audience towards to learn more about the Equal Rights Amendment and what kind of influence or impact people watching may be able to have?
Googling ERA will bring a ton of information, and there is a Netflix documentary, Mrs. America, that really popularized the issue and tipped the scale. I mean, the irony was that Virginia was the 38th required state to ratify that amendment. Yes. There is if somebody is a fan of Netflix series, there is a whole series called Mrs. America about the issue, and it's about the feminism in the 60s in general, but about the ERA in particular.
Okay, and I'm sorry, tell us one more time what the name of the program was.
Mrs. America on Netflix.
Okay.
It's
definitely
Nice.
something to check out. No, I appreciate you bringing that to our attention and helping to kind of contextualize this sort of exciting but also confusing and not quite yet there news that we're hearing come out of the Capitol.
Yes, and if the Supreme Court was being designed, I don't know, the design is failing for whoever designed it. I saw that yesterday.
Maybe.
Yeah,
So, I mean,
let's hope there's some
it
truth in
restores
that this trend will continue.
It restores your faith in our justice system a little bit.
Yeah,
Just a bit. Yeah, we're
wish.
hoping.
just a little bit.
Thank you so much for calling in, Godless. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
You have a great night.
Thank you.
Yeah, it is tricky to understand some of these rulings from a lay perspective, but then also they come bundled with a sort of sense of like, can we hold on to this? Is this meaningful? Like, will this just end up getting overturned a week from now? V, you talked about how there's like a lot of whiplash watching the news these days. And so I guess I want to kind of continue to beat the drum that I've been trying to hit all spring and summer, that these are unnormal times. These are extraordinary times. And that I hope everybody who's listening to this is taking extraordinary care of themselves, because they're up against things that they're not particularly equipped for, that our society has not done a good job training or preparing us for.
Yeah.
All right. Well, would y'all like to go ahead and take a call from Leigh in New Jersey?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Leigh, what can we do for you tonight?
Everyone.
Howdy.
Yes, so I joined a D&D group, and there's a theist in there. So we started having a conversation. We know how well those go. And we got into a conversation about, I guess so one thing I will say for her is that she does not believe that, like, we should outlaw gay marriage. She doesn't believe we should take, kids away from gay parents, or we should deny them that. But she's under the impression that they are, like, less ideal than a straight couple. And I'm curious about whether I should even try to address whether they are or not, or even just drop it, because, she doesn't seem to care much about, trying to stop them. But, she cites to some articles that seem to show, just from the, the abstract, that there seems to be a correlation between, better graduation rates or whatever. But I'm just like, should I even bother to go into that?
Yeah, that's a super fair question. And I'm not surprised to hear that there's at least some opportunity to sort of cherry pick outcome data. And there may even be some narrative that you could craft out of that. But I have to point out that the source of those negative incomes is not the queer folks themselves. It's the social pressure and everything that goes on top of that. So ultimately, I think the answer to your question of, like, should I even engage with it, comes down to how much time you got. Like, how many spoons do you have left over? How much energy do you have? And how willing are you to pour some of that energy out for somebody who may or may not be very receptive or able to move forward with it in any meaningful way?
Yeah, I mean, that's my thing right now, is because, I'm having a general discussion with this person because she opened up a Discord server in her D&D group. And it's like, oh, if you have any faith-based questions, you can ask me about that. And so we, went down the rabbit hole. It's confirmed that I am going to hell, so, that's fun.
Yeah.
It's always good to have that reminder from time to time.
Yeah. And
I RSVP'd years ago, but every once in a while I just check in, make sure that they haven't lost my reservation.
We're all going so we can just hang out and, have a party. But
it's going to be awesome.
We're going back and forth on it. And I'm like, she has these very not like wishy-washy, but very much like, able to squeeze her God belief into all the little cracks that we have. And again, I'm like, she doesn't seem like someone who's going to act out and try to, like, really enforce her beliefs on everyone. So I'm like, well, like, should we even try to address those? Same thing with the, the ideal gay parents versus the ideal straight parents? Is it just not something we have to care about? Because I mean, what if it finds out that they aren't ideal? Does that mean we still try to stop them from having kids, or does it not really matter? It's kind of this whole the whole issue, I guess.
Right. Yeah, and there are pros and cons to this, because on the one hand, I would say it's not your job to educate anybody, and especially people who are not going to have any immediate impact on your life. Who really cares what they think in the moment, right? Like if she's just is going along with her cherry pick data, then okay, free country, you get to do that. I'm not going to put that emotional baggage on myself and make myself engage with you. There are other better ways to spend that energy. But at the same time, these people who are more moderate and who are more willing to listen, at least to a degree, might be the ones who you can help lead out of that kind of bigotry, right? So she's already come part of the way, it sounds like, and that could be because she was raised in that way, or she questioned a little bit herself and is coming out of a more fundamentalist approach. So she seems to be hanging on to some assumptions, but she's already done a little bit of that thinking. So it's very possible that this is the type of person who would actually really benefit from a little bit more pushback. But again, that is something that you are not expected to do, and no one can expect that of you.
Well, I guess the part of that kind of came out of the, all the stuff that's happening with George Floyd and all the, silence is oppression sort of thing. So I'm like, well, if I see stuff like this and I can do something, I don't expect that I'm going to totally change her mind, but like challenging her and making her have to think and reach out to people and like figure it out might trigger something. So it's like, well, I don't have to do that, but there are people who are suffering from this kind of thinking, maybe not specifically from her, but from people who think like her. So, I felt that, well, if I'm silent about it and I can say something, why don't I, in the same sense as, what's going on around you, maybe in a different context, but still the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, that is an important thing to think about. I would say that discretion is needed here in terms of where you're putting your energy. I know that there was somebody that I quoted the other week, and I still do not have the actual source, which is terrible. But the general consensus that I'm seeing more and more in the Black community is, when we say don't be silent, we don't mean arguing with your racist uncle who's never going to change his mind, right? That's not where we want you to raise your voice. That's not a thing that is helpful. Put that towards writing to your congressperson. Put that towards joining a protest if you feel comfortable with that. Put that towards maybe sharing information online or donating, because money is speech. So this whole concept of raising your voice is important and should be done, but also that doesn't mean that every time you come across a bad idea, you have to challenge it, because that's burnout going to happen real quick.
Yeah, I mean, my plan was to take the conversations and try to parse them out, because she would send me like blocks of text that had like 4 different ideas in it, but to take it and kind of post the response and the discussion on like a blog me and my friend are doing, and see if that kind of helps. So, because, people can read it and see if it makes any sense to them. But I guess that was just my thought is. Yeah.
No, I think that's a great approach. And to, mirror what V said, I want to point you towards what Trystan was talking about at the end of the interview, when he said, if you're able to march. If you are going to write poetry for the marchers to read when they get home, write poetry. If writing a blog post is your version of communicating and pushing these ideas, then absolutely do that. If you're able to connect with somebody in your D&D group, I mean, whatever it looks like to be working towards a solution to these problems, let's work towards solutions and not get too hung up about whether or not we are getting pugnacious and standing up for every infraction, but be actually working towards changing the world in meaningful ways.
Speaking as a lifelong game master, my thought is
it's always
like,
good to have experts on this show.
oh yeah. My thought is like,
Yeah,
you know, why
she's the
is your
ultimate game master in my
Yes.
group, but luckily not my specific one.
Yeah, it's like there's so many opportunities in D&D to engage with this sort of thing. Like just the fact that, you know, the world that you're all pretending to be in is a simulation of a land where gods are real, and how vastly different that is. Just like, yeah, I started to believe that Mithra, goddess of magic, was real because, you know, I chanted and a light appeared, and that was actual evidence. And you know, it's honestly, you know, games are such a vehicle for exploring new worldviews and introducing people to new worldviews that honestly, I think that it's not that just using that might even be enough to do some little work on their brain.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, that was like one of the other players in my group doesn't believe in evolution. So someone, I think in the Discord, joked that I should try to introduce evolution into the game somehow to somehow put that into my character to have
Start
a discussion while
Pokemon.
not having a discussion.
Hey, it looks like you've got an interesting vehicle to spark conversation at least, which is awesome.
Yeah, see how it goes. Again, we're already all going to hell, so you know, gotta live it up.
It's a sunk cost fallacy at this point.
Right. Well, and let me just encourage you to be taking care of yourself as you're pushing forward on these issues. You know, if you're able to make an impact, great, make an impact. Just make sure that you are staying safe and sane, and sleeping, hydrating, eating, all of those kinds of pieces as you take on these challenges.
Sounds good. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say, yeah, okay. I will keep that in mind, and I will, you know, keep arguing as much as I want to.
Sounds about right. That's what I do.
Fair enough. Best of luck to you. Thanks for calling in and I guess strategizing with us.
Yeah. Let us know how it goes.
Have a great night.
Right. I mean, I'm in the Discord, so I can keep people posted in there. People are
perfect.
But yep. So see you. Have a good night.
All right. Yeah, I am fascinated by the different types of communication that go into games and how it can bring different types of people and allow them to try on different types of hats. You know, be in these different experiences, and how role playing and all of this can help really shape our worldview.
Oh yeah.
I mean, so
stories
much
are the
of-
best way to connect with people.
Oh yeah, stories are what people are made of, and like being able to get out just for a little bit is huge.
Absolutely. Well, let's take a quick moment to check back in with Brutus out of Minnesota. Brutus, what's on your mind tonight?
Oh, what's up? I was not expecting to come up this soon. So I was watching a video by Bull, the Fifth Column. Amazing YouTuber, by the way. Absolutely based as hell. And he mentioned something that I later looked up, and I found out a bunch of other things. That the term toxic masculinity actually originally comes from men's rights groups, and that men's rights groups are originally a left-wing thing before the right basically hijacked them and made them a bunch of angry, misogynistic man babies, pickup artists, and stuff like that. And I know that, and it's very easy to kind of get lost as a man when so much social order has kind of changed very quickly, and a lot of men don't feel like they have a lot of direction or know what it means to be a man, and whatever that capital M man entails. I know that Eric Murphy, and I know that Jimmy Snow also went through their kind of periods. And I went through a period when I was a pickup artist, and I kind of did a few douchey things. One of the things that did eventually get me to break away was that there's so much interaction between pickup artist communities and red pill communities that I was like, okay, I'm starting to internalize some of these angry misogynist values, so I'm getting the fuck out of here.
Yeah.
Good choice.
But I feel like it's. But I feel like we should focus on the stuff, especially because I think trans men in particular are people who would need this sort of thing and would need to kind of figure out where they are, how to basically feel like a man, how to kind of fit these very esoteric and very difficult to quantify needs that somebody has as somebody who wants to be a man. And obviously the right Wayne is just going to tell a trans dude, get the fuck out of here, you're a chick. But I think that with so many men that are very confused, a lot of men do go to stuff like if it's because of something to do with wanting to be a man, they get into some toxic masculinity bullshit. If it's with women, like you're kind of, men don't talk to each other and we're very socially isolated. So for advice on women, it's kind of your dad or your football coach who's been divorced 3 times and is pissed off at women in general. And if that's all the help you're getting, well, of course, something like pickup artists are going to be kind of this easy thing to gravitate towards. And even though it feels so cringy, it's like, who the fuck else do you turn to at that point?
Yeah.
I think Christy,
part of the problem might be that our culture has not known what it is to be a man for a very, very, very long time. Like, I mean, growing up and sort of being pushed into this role and trying to force myself to find a place in that role, just the picture that I developed of what it was to be a man was so vague and weird. And eventually it seems like what I happened upon was that what our culture was defining for me as man was anything not woman, anything not femme, anything not female. It was defined by what it was not, and pretty much never defined by what it was, except in the like extreme narrative of logical violence, that sort of thing.
Yeah, or just things like, well, I have guns, I'll go to a strip club and I'll drink beer. But those are very shallow things. Anybody, at least in the United States, can go buy a gun. That's not a difficult thing. I'm actually in the process of buying one because I live in Minneapolis and political violence is getting a little bit nuts. And there's like been things like Proud Boys and stuff like that, and other right-wing groups are starting to show up here. So I kind of want to be ready for that situation. But we, like, for example, Native Americans, they when you as kind of a coming of when you became a man, you would go live in the woods on your own for a week with no food or no supplies, just to kind of find yourself. And the Norse did this too. Actually, speaking of the Norse, I find it kind of funny that the two ancient cultures that gave women the most rights were the Norse and the Spartans, which even though the Spartans have a few problems, they're the two like manliest cultures that ever existed. But I just feel like when you do feel like you're strong and secure in your manhood, you don't feel the need to kind of browbeat and force women into a box to earn their respect. In fact, one thing that I've said a few times, and I don't know how helpful this is, but I've said to like red pill type people, maybe if you didn't have such a self-victimizing attitude, women would actually respect you. And maybe if you stopped blaming other people for this sort of thing, you wouldn't need to put women back in the kitchen by force to gain their respect. And,
it's definitely an exercise in a lack of self-esteem, I think, and it's a result of just the way the world is changing. And there is a very interesting notion that is going around on BreadTube, which is a thing that exists.
Yep.
That a lot of the issues with men's rights activists and a lot of the concerns that they're bringing up, they are tying to identity politics, quote unquote, and losing social status, when actually what they are realizing is that the way that our economy has structured society makes them meaningless as cogs in machines, and they don't have the ability to identify as individuals and make their own destiny and all of this. And I don't know how much of that I buy into necessarily. I would have to do more research, but the idea that a lot of this is tied to economics and politics outside of the arguments against these LGBTQ people come in and suddenly I don't have rights. It's no, suddenly you are questioning things to the point where you are realizing that you really don't have as much freedom or as much autonomy as you thought, because that illusion is kind of being shattered by social change.
Well, yeah, and the thing, and it's interesting that you mentioned economics, because since the economy has been turned upside down as a result of the 2007 financial crisis, and the impacts that's had throughout the 2010s, there's actually been a dramatic increase of suicidality and neuroticism and a bunch of other stuff because of how many people are adults working 2 or 3 jobs and still move back in with their parents. And the thing that I think a lot of people forget to realize about privilege is that, and this is kind of a marketing mistake that I think the left has made, I don't think we should have went with the term white privilege or male privilege, because these are not privileges. These are basic expectations of citizenship. Not getting your shit kicked in by the cops over a routine stop is not a privilege. That's a basic societal expectation that other people are not experiencing. The way that white straight males have been living is the way that everybody else should have been living. It's not that we get a big paycheck or anything. It's just other people deal with shit that we don't deal with, and that's about all that means.
Right. It's a translation issue, I think, because that is what a lot of people who use those terms mean, is the privilege comes from being able to be treated as a person, right? And having your autonomy respected. That's where the privilege comes in. It's not saying that everybody who's a straight white man is going to, become a millionaire and never have a worry in the world, right? It's just whatever issues that they are facing, it is not because of direct discrimination based on identity. And that shouldn't be the case for anybody. So yeah, I agree. The contention comes in when other people are requiring that they are treated with equal amounts of respect.
Yeah, and it is a marketing thing. Like I mentioned last time, I don't think we should have made the term toxic masculinity was just kind of a bad term, because if you say that, then people think you're saying that men are bad. But if you say macho bullshit, they'll be like, oh yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. And especially like at a time where I feel like, and this is again why I think that pickup artistry became kind of a thing, is that in the 50s, men had all the power, and our culture and the skills that men have traditionally developed have circled very much around the women being financially dependent on men. Mm-hmm. And a lot of like pickup artist guys like Roosh V, who I would punch in the face if I ever met him. That's a joke. Not really. I fucking hate that guy. But it's a lot of anger that he went to Denmark and said that redistribution cock blocked me because women don't feel like they need men anymore because they get social safety net. And I'm just thinking, well, other guys are getting laid in Denmark just fine. It's that you have shitty fucking values, and that's why you went home and were only able to sleep with like a nervous 18-year-old who didn't know what she was doing.
Oh
But and the consent was kind of iffy on that situation too. But I think that women have developed skills generationally to kind of deal with people much better, whereas men was just kind of like, I kind of get what I want because I got money, and if women don't hunker down and marry me and aren't super this and that, they're going to be homeless, or they're going to go to like a boarding school or a woman's home or something. And also, as much as people like to say otherwise, women were still getting around in the 50s. The guy with the motorcycle and the jacket who sleeps around comes from the 50s. And there was a lot of anxiety about the milkman or their neighbor or somebody hooking up with their wife. So people were not as chaste in the 50s as people think. There still was stuff going on.
Yeah, the truth is humans don't change even if the structures that we put them in does. Right? Like we're all still humans, and so as we look back at history, it's important to recognize that the things we wrote down aren't necessarily lining up with the things that happened. There was certainly infidelity in the margins, but there's plenty of queer folks that existed. We know that that's just how genetics work.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, fastest growing surgery in Saudi Arabia is repairing the hymen, which means that women are having sex in Saudi Arabia when it's dangerous to their lives. But in this community, I did find somebody who was not as toxic. He goes by the name Zan Perion. And he actually, if you posted something misogynistic back when he had forums, you'd actually get banned. And one of the things I wanted to do with my psychology degree is basically try to come up with a very academically focused way to how to be better at dating, how to be better at dealing with women in relationships. And that's
Hey Brutus, you're breaking up a little bit. We're losing you a little bit there.
Yeah, let me actually ask you if you're able to hear us to join us in the Discord server here in just a couple of minutes. We're going to be wrapping up the episode and continuing to address these issues of gender kind of in light of what we saw in the interview today and just what we're seeing in the news. So that, of course, goes to everybody who's watching this live. We are really excited to have some folks who have been on the show before to come and join us, and would be really excited to have you, Brutus, and everybody else keep this conversation rolling, even though we're going to go ahead and wrap up the episode here in just a moment. All right, and I believe we've lost him entirely. So, yeah, fun episode. A little bit of a different format. Obviously, a lot on folks' minds. I mean, there's just a lot in the ether right now as we're all kind of sorting through these pieces.
Yeah, let us know what you think about the format. Would you like to see other longer form interviews with people kind of as their own thing that we then talk about on the front and back end? Because that's definitely something that we could make happen.
Absolutely. And I saw some different comments in the chat as we've been checking in on Discord and on YouTube, and a lot of great ideas for topics and things along those lines. And I'll just say to the audience, we're excited to do it. Send folks our way. If you yourself are listening to this and you feel like you have some unique experience or interesting take on gender or sexuality because of your work as a cam girl, as a Hooters waitress, as a doctor, lawyer, business executive. I mean, whatever it is that you feel gives you a unique take on the world, we hope that you'll reach out. We're sex@atheist-community.org, and we're always excited to hear from y'all. So with that, I'll be joining you two folks here in the Discord in just a moment. Before we get to that, I want to make sure to jump into our crew cam and take a moment to thank all of the hardworking folks that have been putting this show together throughout the day. We appreciate y'all so very much. Thank you for continuing to social distance. And until we can, staying out of the library, keeping each other and ourselves safe. Hopefully we'll be able to return soon, but we're certainly not in a rush to do that until it's ready. I want to, continue to encourage folks to be taking care of themselves, to be wearing masks and staying safe while all of this, particularly Austin and Travis County, continue to see increasing and rapidly increasing numbers.
Yes. Please wear your masks. We will do an entire episode in masks and make Vern want to throw us all off a cliff.
Our sound engineer will love it. Let's do it. So with that, we hope that if you're able, you will stick around and join us in Discord. But otherwise, we would like all non-TERFs to go out and give themselves a big ol' orgasm. Or, better yet, give somebody else one.
What are we doing, man? What are we doing?
No, you're done.